So, there's a new law that's really shining a spotlight on the path to U.S. citizenship. And it makes you think, for the millions of people who are permanent residents, what's the real difference between just living here and truly belonging? Let's get into it. All right, let's just jump right in with a really important question. Say you have a green card. You're a lawful permanent resident. Can you vote in a federal election? What do you think? Well, the answer to that question leads us directly to this new piece of legislation. Okay, so this new law is called the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or the Save America Act for short. And look, it's really important to get this straight. This is not about changing immigration rules. Not at all. It's all about clarifying the rules for the voting booth, really just drawing a clear, firm line in the sand. So what does this law actually do? Well, at its core, it's pretty simple. It says that if you want to register to vote in a federal election, you have to show proof, actual documents that you're a U.S. citizen. Now, you've probably heard about stuff like this in the wider conversation about election integrity, right? But for what we're talking about today, the key thing is how this makes an old rule official. It formalizes a boundary that's always been there for green card holders. I really like this way of thinking about it. The law acts like a mirror. It's not changing who you are if you're a green card holder. It's just reflecting your current status, crystal clear. You're a vital part of the community. You contribute in so many ways. But that mirror shows that you haven't quite crossed that final line into, say, full civic participation, which includes things like voting. And this is the part we really need to hammer home. The SAVE Act? It's not some new roadblock on the journey to getting a green card or becoming a citizen. Nope. Think of it more like it's just officially writing down and enforcing a rule that was already there. It's a clarification, plain and simple, not a whole new change. Okay, so all this talk about clarification naturally leads us to a bigger question, right? What are the fundamental differences between being a permanent resident versus a full U.S. citizen? It's a gap that this law really puts a spotlight on. All right, this chart really breaks it down nicely. At first glance, you might think, hey, they look pretty similar. Both green card holders and citizens can live and work here. They both pay federal taxes. But once you dig a little deeper, the differences, well, they're huge. Voting in federal elections, holding a U.S. passport, serving on a federal jury, those are all reserved for citizens. And then there's the biggest difference of them all. And that's the risk of deportation. I mean, think about it. If you're a permanent resident, you can have your status taken away and be deported if you violate certain laws. But a naturalized U.S. citizen, they can't be deported. That is probably the single most important legal protection you get when you become a citizen. Now, obviously, there are a bunch of ways people get green cards, right? Through family, job, seeking asylum. But to really see how this journey works, let's zoom in on one specific path. We're going to look at the EB-5 Immigrant Investor Program. It's a perfect case study for what we're talking about. So for these investors, the journey kicks off with a pretty serious amount of money. We're talking a minimum of $800,000. And that cash has to be invested into a U.S. business. So here's how it works step by step. First, you make that big investment. Second, that money has to create at least 10 full-time jobs for American workers. And then, once everything is verified, the investor and their family gets permanent residency. But notice that last part. The big prize at the end of this stage is a green card, not a citizenship certificate. And this right here is a super important point to grasp. For most people doing the EB-5 program, they're not really looking for a huge financial payday. The real return on investment, the main goal, is the immigration benefit. It's the green card itself. That legal permanent residency is the key that opens the door to maybe one day becoming a citizen. Okay, so you've got the green card. You made it happen, whether it was through the EB-5 program or some other way. Now what? How do you actually cross that bridge from resident to full-blown citizen? Well, that process has a name: naturalization. Yeah, the journey from resident to citizen doesn't happen overnight. As soon as you get that green card, a clock starts ticking. And for most people, that clock has to run for 5 full years. That's a mandatory waiting period. You have to be a resident for that long before you can even start the application for naturalization. But just waiting 5 years isn't enough. It's just one piece of the puzzle. You also have to prove you've been living here continuously. You have to show you've been physically present. Then you've got to demonstrate you have a handle on the English language. You have to pass a U.S. civics test. And you have to prove you're of good moral character. It's a really thorough process, for sure.
So you can see why understanding this entire journey, this whole big picture from the very start, is just absolutely crucial, especially if you're an EB5 investor. You need to know what you're getting into. And this slide, this is a big reality check. We just talked about that 5-year clock for naturalization, right? Well, the total journey can take way, way longer. If you're an investor from a country with super high demand, like China or India, there are huge visa backlogs. That can mean the whole process, from the day you invest your money to the day you're finally eligible to apply for citizenship, can take 15 years, or even more. This quote really just sums up the whole mindset you need to have. Getting a green card is a massive deal. Don't get me wrong, it's a huge achievement that lets you build a life here. But if you're aiming for that complete set of rights and protections, like the right to vote, then you have to see the green card as a waypoint. It's a critical stop, but it's not the final destination. So what can you actually do with all this information? What are the practical steps? Well, first, track your time. Know exactly when you're in and out of the country. Second, talk to an immigration attorney, maybe once a year, just to stay on top of any policy changes. And third, start planning for naturalization early. Don't wait until year 5 to start thinking about it. Get your ducks in a row ahead of time to make things smoother. When you boil it all down, the Save America Act is kind of like a quiet little nudge. It's a clear reminder for every permanent resident to look down the road. It sharpens that line between just being a resident and becoming a citizen, and it reminds you to think about what's next. It really forces you to ask yourself, okay, you've made it to this waypoint, but is citizenship your ultimate destination?